Why am I so? Hi, this is Nancy. Did you know that dementia isn't a disease, but a group of 40 different diseases and conditions? It is a chronic, persistent disorder of the mental process caused by a brain disease or injury and marked by memory loss, personality changes, and impaired reasoning. I will be discussing grieving someone who is still alive. My name is Nancy, and I'm the founder of SRSRN Life Coaching and Consultants. First of all, grief in its simplest form is the loss of someone or something that you value, something you're going to miss. Grieving is very personal. Everyone grieves differently. But today I'm going to be speaking of a special kind of grief. It's not familiar to a lot of people, and what it is, it's called disenfranchised grief. And many people aren't familiar with the variety of griefs there are, even though they may be feeling it and not knowing it. But a disenfranchised grief, which is any grief that goes unacknowledged or unavailable by social norms. WebMD. Disenfranchised grief refers to grieving scenarios that don't align with the status quo. The grief is not shown in media, it's not shown in movies, it's not really shown much. And if it was shown, someone would actually have to be looking for it to understand it. And I think sometimes in life, you have to be in a situation before you can understand it, especially when it comes to grieving. But did you know, according to the CBC, a traumatic brain injury, or which I would be calling TBI for lack of saying the same word over and over, can be from a bump, a blow, a jolt, or by any anything that's penetrating the head. Some 2020 statistics about traumatic brain injuries were approximately 223,000 hospitalizations, over 24,000 deaths a year, and 611 hospitalizations and 170 deaths a day. Now, that may hit a little closer to home. At this point, you already knew more than I did when I had to deal with a traumatic brain injury. But just to give you a little backstory, I'll be taking you down my journey in hopes that it'll help anyone out there that's dealing and feeling their grief isn't valid, because it's very valid. It's very, very valid in a variety of different ways. I mean, there's so many mental illnesses, there's so many diseases of the brain. The brain is a very complex creature. There's not much known about it. You know, we simply just think that, hey, it's the brain. Everybody has to know what it is. Yet, not really. It's not what it truly is. I'm really trying to get through to some people that maybe are being touched by it. Maybe they're just entering this journey, or maybe they've been in it and think they're alone. Well, my journey started a long time ago. A little backstory about me. In 1980, I married the man of my dreams, the man I had fallen in love with. I loved his hazel eyes and his smile. They still make me think. But we had two children. We still have two children. And as of December 29, 1993, after 13 years, and like I said, two children still later, life was never going to be the same again. You know, we think we're ready for things in life. And, people say, oh, enjoy today because we don't know what tomorrow brings. Well, it's true. And no matter how healthy or how young or anything, life could just be taken away from you. And sometimes it's not just the external being, but what makes the being it's himself, the internal, the part of the memory, the parts of them that only you know, the parts you fell in love with. I mean, this was the man I've grown up with. I got married really young, and we grew up together basically. Now, when I was 29, and he was only 32 at the time, I got a phone call in the middle of the night saying, Mrs. Arroyo, you need to pick up your husband from the hospital. He's pretty banged up. Now, that was what they told me. It's like, wow, okay, I got to pick up my husband from the hospital. This is kind of weird. So I got dressed up, kids got dressed up, and we left to the hospital. During our little voyage to the hospital, we did what we do best, which is joke around. This is who we were. My husband was a prankster. He was a jokester. He was in really good shape. He used to ride bike. He did the 5 borough marathon in New York. He was very proud of that. And mostly that day, things changed. When I got to the hospital, it was very disappointing because I ran into the emergency room not knowing what to expect, not knowing anything, as a matter of fact. And I asked the nurses there about my husband, and they didn't actually answer me. They didn't really give me anything. They just said, sit down, visiting hours is every 15 minutes on the hour. And it's like, what? And it's like, I'm still not knowing what's happening with my husband. Still thinking, clowning around with the kids, saying, oh, he probably got a broken leg, a broken arm, so we're going to have to carry him home. We're just kidding around. I mean, just putting light on the subject, just making light of the whole situation. When they finally let me go to the back, I actually went in all the different doors, one by one, pulling the screens. And they didn't tell me what room he was in. All I knew was that he was there. And in my mind, He had a broken leg, he had a broken arm, he had something that was easy. So I did go into someone's room that did have that broken leg. I thought it was him, and it wasn't. So after that, I started peeking into the other rooms, and they were more like dividers. And in the very last room, there was a whole bunch of people running in and out. I walked in, and there was my husband just laying there. And it was like, really? What? I don't understand. The nurse, she literally just told me, tell your husband to calm down. And I'm like, boy, you don't know my husband. He is the biggest prankster of all time. He is Mr. Personality. Everybody loves him. This isn't like him. I looked at the which curtains like these. They were all full of throw up. It was a pretty bad situation. And I looked at him in the face. And after so many years together, I knew every inch of this man. I saw his hands, and he had bruises here and here. And I'm talking in his ear, whispering and saying only things he would understand. And I knew, you know, everyone knows their significant other, and they know exactly what to tell them when they want to get a response from them. And nothing. It was nothing. Nothing whatsoever. The only thing I did notice was this little dot on the top of his eye. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. Now, this happened for about 3 hours, just kept on. 15 minutes every 3 hours. And every time I entered the room, that little line was a little bit over and over. And I'm like, okay, something's wrong. He hasn't responded to me. He hasn't spoken to me. He hasn't anything. He hasn't acknowledged me. That's not like him. It's like something is wrong here. And I'm still not, I still don't know what the heck is going on. So the doctor came in and he goes, oh, just let him sleep it off. Go home. We'll see you tomorrow. And I'm like, okay. It was early in the morning. As I was leaving, and I remember this, it's engraved in my mind actually. The doctor comes running after me and he says, wait, wait, wait. And I'm like, what do you want? I mean, he was pretty rude to begin with. He's like, no, no, no. Your husband has a bleed in his head. And I'm like, he has what? He says, oh, he has a bleed in his head. And I'm like, okay. He goes, that's why, you know, he was not acting right. And I'm like, now, really? I've been 3 hours trying to tell people with no one listening that that's not him. This isn't him. He was telling you everybody loved Nelson. He was really one of a kind. He did tell me one thing. He said the next 24 hours would be critical. I mean, I was 29. 29 and a homemaker for a long time. That was my life. Him, the kids. I loved being a homemaker. That's what made my whole life. And I was proud of how my kids were and of what we had accomplished. So, I mean, I have to admit, I was pretty isolated from the rest of the world, but it was myself and it was just at bigger things. But in my world, everything was fine. I knew exactly what I needed to know for my for my life, or more than my life, and for my children's life. All that I had down packed. That was pretty good. Thought I was handling that quite well. The next day, when I got to the hospital, they explained to me a little bit more about a traumatic brain injury, but they were very vague. And I'm like, well, I guess it's not something really big. And I guess it was just plain naive. And it's really not naive then, whether I was 29 or 39 or 59. Still to this day, people don't understand the complications of a traumatic brain injury or a concussion syndrome. And people don't understand that, yeah, that people dying, lots and lots of people die from this. And these are life altering events. After that, I remember visiting my husband. He was pretty knocked out a couple of weeks. He had raccoon eyes. And it was like, something's just not right. And he opened up his eyes and he looked at me. And he just looked at me, very vague. He was kind of confused. And I'm like, what's the matter? I kissed him and said hello. And he's just kind of staring at me. And I'm like, okay. He goes, who are you? Nelson. I mean, he could be a prankster. So I figured, okay, he's just doing one of his. But he didn't know my name. And that wasn't the only time he asked me. During that hospital time, he probably asked me 3, 4 times a day. Easy, easy. As the days went on, his behavior just became really, really weird. He was not behaving like himself. I mean, you have to understand, he really is a prankster. He really was Mr. Personality. He was Mr. Personality. And people came in and they left, and they came in and they left, and they felt bad and they didn't understand. But I'm just there trying to figure this all out, trying to make something out of it, something, because I did not know. And I can't say it's gotten any easier. And that was a long time ago. But nevertheless, I did tell him I was his wife. He didn't understand what a wife was, so it kind of was something you grew with. I asked him about his children. He didn't know he had any children, and that hurt a lot. I don't know which one was more painful, the fact that he didn't know me or did he know his kids? Which were more painful? I mean, what were his kids to think? He stood in the hospital probably 3 weeks or so. During that time, nothing came back. No one ever spoke to me. No one ever gave me any inkling. I would go into the room and he would have knocked all his pills down onto the floor. When I got there, it was like, what's going on here? And he's just looking at me like, what the hell are you? I mean, he's just really looking at me, really confused every single day. And the more he told me, who are you? The more you get that feeling at the pit of your stomach and you say, oh man, something's wrong here. But I never let that get to me. I didn't. I didn't. I did tell him his kid's name. And for a few days, not probably 2 weeks, a week and a half, I told him his kids' names over and over and over and over. Because I guess in my mind, besides me losing a husband, well, not losing a husband, but not having a husband remember me, 2 kids. I mean, how are they going to handle it? My daughter was probably 8, and my son was 11. And my daughter was extremely close to her daddy. I mean, that was her daddy. My son, a good kid. He's always been a solid person. He's always been a blessing. And I have to admit, sometimes I have no answers for things. And I just say, it has to be God. God sometimes puts people, things, events, things we can't we have no knowledge of or reasoning for. And as much as we want to put a reason behind something, sometimes you just can't. Sometimes, as much as you want to fight something, sometimes the fight is bigger than you. And I'm tough. I'm telling you, I'm not a softie. I'm not a wuss. I've always been a tough person. And I mean, getting married young isn't easy. Having our life was just like getting to where it was really, really comfortable. I mean, his position and his job, everything was just like falling. I mean, we were married 13 years before his accident. And it's hard to say after his accident. But let me give you a little bit more explanation. In trying to see how the kids were going to react, I was trying to tell them how his father had the black and blue eyes and, that he was going to be tired and just try to ease it down there, so they would understand a little bit better. But things weren't that easy. I went, I mean, I was, this was such a big role change that I remember getting his check from the job and I went to go cash it. I had no idea how to cash a check. I mean, sometimes the things we take for granted are the simplest things. But I went into that bank and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And it was just weird. And it's like, wow, I don't know how to do that. That's all right. It didn't really bother me. It didn't bother me. It's weird what you remember when you have a traumatic brain injury and what you don't. Because for some reason, the one thing my husband never forgot was how to drive. The brain is a really, really complicated organ. From that time to now, they still haven't done much research on it. And the research they have done hasn't really gone very far because everyone's brain is different. Everyone's brain is different. It's as unique as we are. In researching some of these things and trying to get some facts down, I realized how complex and how strange the world is. And the brain, even doctors don't like committing to what they say about it. What are they going to tell me something wrong? I mean, they really couldn't have told me anything worse than what I already knew. He was discharged and he drove because apparently he liked driving. And we got home. He didn't know where we lived. He didn't know. He took an elevator. He was like, what is this? We got into the apartment because we lived in Flushing, Queens at the time. And he just said, something smells. And that was the last time he could smell because he did lose his sense of smell. And he still doesn't have it. I mean, you could go through life faking some things, and it's easier sometimes to fake it than to admit it. And sometimes your story could be so strange that maybe you don't understand it too well. So even though you try and you try to explain and you try to help, sometimes you just can't do anything. There was nothing I could do to undo what happened to him. There was nothing, I mean, nothing in this world that I could have said or done or been or not been. Nothing. My mother had a prayer group one day, and they were praying pretty hard. And my daughter, she just says, I want my daddy back. I want my daddy back. I don't want him. I want my daddy back. And that's hard. And I've never heard a kid pray so hard. But that day, she had all those women crying. Doesn't get any easier. Sometimes it's better to see what we want to see than to see what's really there. All I know was that this man did not know me. He knew nothing about me. He had no idea where he was from, what he was about, who he was, even his smile. The smile I fell in love with, and his eyes. The ones I told you twinkled. They probably twinkled the last time on the 28th, because as of the 29th and beyond, they're kind of flat. They have a flat affect. The smile isn't there anymore. It's been a very long journey. And in helping you see it a little bit more clearer, and not only for me, like I said, all those other people out there, because if you have 176 deaths a day, that's a lot. That means chances are someone you know in your family or someone related to you or affiliated to you will have some sort of problem or have to deal with one that has some sort of problem with a traumatic brain injury. Since I thought, hey, we got married so young, this may be romantic, trying to make everything better. That was me, trying always to be the optimist in this world. I gave him back my engagement ring. And I looked at him and I told him, Nelson, when you fall in love with me again, I want you to give it back to me. Because I just thought it was kind of romantic at the time. And it probably is in somebody else's eyes. It probably is in another world, in another chapter of my life. It wasn't that romantic to me because he never gave me it back. We're still together. And it's been over 30 years, obviously, about, and nothing's gotten better. People see what they want to see. They want to see things that way. It makes things easier for them. I wrote letters and I sent them out to a bunch of different people, giving them, the story, giving them the inside scoop, the things that happen behind closed doors, the things I'm not going to go around admitting to the world. But I wanted these people to realize, hey, if you don't come back into his life, he's not going to remember you. And if I don't keep on repeating your name or who you are, guess what? You're not going to matter. You're not going to be anything. So for all the people that go out there and say, hey, do you remember this? I don't know what they think they're doing. I really don't. It's so upsetting because it's like, how many times are you going to say the same thing? How many times are you going to ask somebody, hey, do you remember this? Do you remember this? Because it's not just frustrating to me, but to him. You know, imagine you're confused enough and someone's trying to tell you who you are and where you belong in this life. No, we cannot do that. One day I went to visit my mother and we went to Delancey. And this day I was actually feeling pretty good. We went to our old stomping grounds and we're walking to these familiar places, really familiar. We grew up here. So this is someplace we passed every single day. He went to get a haircut. So he went up there and I was feeling kind of good. I'm like, okay. You know, like I said, that little pessimistic person in the back of my head that keeps on coming out every now and then. So I let him go. I went across the street and even sometimes I wonder if I would trip him up, if maybe I would, you know, he would remember something. But that day, we left him in the barbershop. He came down. He was standing on the corner. Me and my mother passed him. Not once, not twice, but three times. And he didn't know who we were. He did not have a clue. If nothing broke me at that point, I realized this wasn't something that was just going to go away. As much as I wanted it to go away, as much as I just couldn't believe this, hey, this isn't happening. I mean, I've never heard someone talk about this. I've never heard anybody speak about a traumatic brain injury. Never heard of anyone saying someone got memory loss. I've never heard someone saying anything. And it's not just the things he could remember and the things he couldn't remember. There was more to it. His personality wasn't that of a 32-year-old man. It was like a 14-year-old, pretty spoiled kid. I mean, the tantrums and the way he behaved, it wasn't him. We went to the doctors. This was one of the last appointments we had in the city. And we we were in the waiting room, no problem. All of a sudden, he got so pissed off and he stomped out of that doctor's office. And I'm like, what the heck? What's going on here? And I was so embarrassed. Now I know I shouldn't have been embarrassed. So when the doctor came out, I told him, I grabbed him. Actually, he was calling somebody else, but I grabbed him and I said, listen, we're leaving because he just left. And he's like, no, 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 bring him back here. And in that, I said, you know, no one told me anything. They let him leave the hospital. They let me leave the hospital. And they never told us anything. All I knew that he had to take a whole bunch of new medicines that he never took before, and that maybe he'll have seizures. That was as far as I knew. That doctor was the first doctor to actually ever say anything. And all he would tell me, because I did tell him, I don't understand this. This man is the total opposite of what my husband is. And he said exactly word for word what he told me. Well, in 7 years, we'll know if things stay the same, if they change, no, if they stay the same, if they'll get worse, or if they'll get better. That's it. If they stood the same, wasn't any great thing. If they get worse, I was like, oh my gosh, it can't really get worse. I mean, I could tell he was suffering. He was suffering. I was suffering. The kids were suffering. I mean, we had to change our entire life. When you love someone, truly love them, you do things like this. You do things for them. And that was one of the last New York minutes because we moved to Florida. And in moving to Florida, I hoped that, the weather was better, the atmosphere was better, the whole ambiance was a lot calmer. I figured, hey, if he's going to have a chance, at least if we move someplace, nobody will know him. So it's kind of easier meeting someone for the first time and not knowing them than knowing who they were in the past. Because if you had to see who they were in the past, you'll know who he was. So there was no comparison. So I figured he'll get a better shot. He will. So we moved. The weather was better. The kids were pretty happy, for what it was. I mean, we made life of what life could be. But nothing changes that head trauma. All we knew as time went on was that things could get worse. I mean, his personality could change from minute to minute, and I had nothing to figure this out. I mean, he would be this foul mouthed monster one minute, and the next minute be like a child in excruciating pain. I mean, who lives like this? His behavior was so unpredictable. Still is, kinda. And the worse he feels and the more pain he feels, the worse everything gets. And it's not fair. It's not fair to him. And as much as I would have wanted to, I couldn't do much. And in sharing this story, for the long run, there's a lot of changes with a traumatic brain injury, so don't be surprised. Get yourself involved, get yourself a support group, and if the support group you have now doesn't believe you or doesn't stand behind you, you know what? Get a new one. Don't be so loyal to people that aren't loyal to you. And if you go as far as to explain to people about the situation and explain to people the changes this person is going through, and you're honest enough to do that, and if they can't be there for you, you know what? Don't let it make you feel any worse than you feel. Don't let it hurt you anymore. Life is tough, and living with someone with a traumatic brain injury or personality disorder or someone that just asks you more than once, do you remember me? Do I know you? What's your name? Those are the hardest sentences you'll hear. Those are the hardest sentences that no matter how many times they're told, they're asked, you'll never find a way of answering them. You'll never be able to put your heart behind it because some things are just too painful. My daughter also had a head trauma, which is ironic, and that one was caused by abuse. And I think people just don't understand the complications of concussion syndrome. And if they don't, I wish they would read it up because mental illness isn't the same thing. A concussion syndrome is a traumatic brain injury. And luckily for my faith, I guess God felt I didn't hear it right the first time. So maybe that's why it happened two times. Kind of weird. I don't like saying my life story because even to me, it seems unreal. Even to me telling you my life story, it's like, oh my gosh, who's going to believe me? But it doesn't matter. It only matters to the people that are in your support group, the people that are going through it. And for all the people out there, which are the caretakers, the doctors, the nurses, have some compassion. Don't don't be so cruel. This world is cruel enough. There's absolutely no reason for me to have been put in that situation and for me to learn things so slowly, for me to witness my husband having seizures. I didn't ever even seen somebody with a seizure. My husband is still in chronic pain. And when we go out, guess what? It's on those good days, maybe. And those good days are getting further and further between. I know he's having a hard time dealing with it, and it breaks me, but I love him. And just like my daughter, I can't give up on the people I love. I can't. I just wish other people would embrace and not question so much because I already did the research. There's so many people out there, friends and family and neighbors and whoever. I'm telling you this straightforward. It's not a question. It's not those 7 years, maybe 7 years. Yes, every brain trauma is different, but there are some things that are permanently changing in your world and in your life. And maybe that beautiful love story you started is just in the making. We don't know how we're going to end up tomorrow. So I wish you all love. I wish you all happiness. And above all, just be good to one another. No, we live on this earth a very short time. A very, very short time. Again, my name is Nancy, and I'm the founder of SOSRN Life Coaching and Consultants. For the rest of my story, because I cut it a little short, you could text me, email me, and you could get through to me, and we'll say the story. And we'll go through the long version, and I'll help you get through some of those barriers, or maybe just get that support group, get some answers, because you know what, doctors and nurses and all those people, they're there for your service. And I'm a nurse, and I'll even tell you that they're there for your service. They became doctors and nurses for the reason of being helping other people, hopefully. Because that's not everyone's story. But the majority of people, they're good people. They just don't understand the answers. They don't understand the questions. So if you have anyone that you're not sure about, or you don't know if what they're dealing with was a result of an accident or a hit or whatever. Could have been a fall. It could be a lot of things that cause it. Ask them. Doesn't kill you. Make a list of the things you want to ask a doctor and ask them. Make a list for the nurses and make sure they're nurses. RNs are usually better educated. Don't just go ask people randomly, because some people like to give answers without knowing. So make sure you go to someone. If not, just Google it. In Googling this, my story wasn't there, but the statistics were there. All the statistics were there. And they're ugly numbers. And make your kids wear helmets, wear seat belts, and be safe, because it's the only way you'll survive to see tomorrow. because once something happens, you can't go back. You can't go back in life. You just got to go forward and you got to keep moving on. Love you guys. Bye.